All right. Story number 2. Death on the Cape. Shall drink. Okay. It was on an August afternoon, shortly after they arrived at their rented cottage in the village of Dennis on Cape Cod, that Alvirah Meehan noticed that there was something very odd about their next-door neighbor, a painfully thin young woman who appeared to be in her late 20s. After Alvirah and Willy looked around their cottage a bit, remarking favorably about the 4-poster maple bed, the hooked rugs, and cheery kitchen, and the fresh, sea-scented breeze, they unpacked their expensive new clothes from the matching Vuitton luggage. Willy then poured an ice-cold beer for each to enjoy on the deck of the house, which overlooked Cape Cod Bay. Drinking for every time they have to drop the fact that they have Vuitton luggage.
Oh, yeah, we know you're rich.
Because of the lottery ticket. Willy, his rotund body eased onto a padded wicker chaise lounge, remarked that it was going to be one heck of a sunset, and thanked God for a little peace. Ever since they had won $40 million in the New York State lot... I'm sorry, I just have to say it every time.
I know what's happening.
Drinky. Ever since they had won $40 million in the New York State lottery, it seemed to Willy, Alvirah had been a walking lightning rod. First, she went to the famous Cypress Point Spa in California and nearly got murdered. Then they had gone on a cruise together, and, wouldn't you know, the man who sat next to them at the community table in the dining room ended up dead as a mackerel. Still, with the accumulated wisdom of his years, Willy was sure that in Cape Cod, at least, they'd have the quiet he'd been searching for. Because fucking Cape Cod never has shit go down. It's a cape, for Christ's sakes. If Alvirah wrote an article for the New York Globe about this vacation, it would have to do with the weather and the fishing. During his narration, Alvirah was sitting at the picnic table, a companionable few feet away from Willy's stretched-out form. She wished she'd remembered to put on a sun hat. The beautician at Sassoon's had warned her against getting sun on her hair.
Okay.
All right. It's such a lovely rust shade now, Mrs. Meehan. We don't want it to get those nasty yellow streaks, do we? Don't go in the sun. Avoid it.
Well, I mean, when has rust ever been a good color for hair?
No one ever says rust is a nice color.
No one's
for
like,
hair.
oh, I love that bronzy blonde you have.
Yeah, I've never heard that. Since recovering from the attempt on her life at the spa, Alvirah had regained all the weight she'd paid $3,000 to lose and was again a comfortable size somewhere between a 14 and a 16. But Willy constantly observed that when he put his arms around her, he knew he was holding a woman. Not one of those half-starved zombies you see in the fashion ads Alvirah was so fond of studying. 40 years of affectionately listening to Willy's observations had left Alvirah with the ability to hear him with one ear and close him out with the other. What a cunt. Love it. Now as she gazed at the tranquil cottages perched atop the grass and sand embankment that served as a seawall, then down below at the sparkling blue-green water and the stretch of rock-strewn beach, she had the troubled feeling that maybe Willy was right. Beautiful as the Cape was, and even though it was a place she had always longed to visit, she might not find a newsworthy story here for her editor, Charlie Evans. 2 years ago, Charlie had sent a New York Globe reporter to interview the Meehans on how it felt to win $40 million. What would they do with it? Alvirah was a cleaning woman. Willy was a plumber. Would they continue in their jobs? Alvirah had told the reporter in no uncertain terms that she wasn't that dumb, that the next time she picked up a broom, it would be when she was dressed as a witch for a Knights of Columbus costume party. Then she had made the list of all the things she wanted to do, and first was the visit to the Cypress Point Spa, where she planned to hobnob with the celebrities she'd been reading about all her life. That had led Charlie Evans to ask her to write an article for the Globe about how her stay at the spa. He gave her a sunburst pin that continued... It's dark. I'm blind.
Yeah.
He gave her a sunburst pin that contained a microphone so that she could record her impressions of the people she spoke with and play the tape back when she wrote the article. The thought of her pin brought an unconscious smile to Alvirah's face. Better. As Willy said, she'd gotten into hot water at Cypress Point. She'd picked up on what was really going on and was nearly murdered for her trouble. But it had been so exciting, and now she was great friends with everyone at the spa and could go there every year as a guest. And thanks to her help solving the murder on the ship last year, they had an invitation to take a free cruise to Alaska any time they desired. Cape Cod was beautiful, but Alvirah had a sneaking suspicion Willy might be right, that this might be an ordinary vacation that wouldn't make good copy for the Globe. Precisely at that moment, she glanced over the row of hedges on the right perimeter of their property and observed a young woman with a somber expression standing at the railing of her porch next door and staring at the bay. It was the way her hands were gripping the railing. Tension, Alvirah thought. She's stuffed with it. It was the way young women turned her head, looked straight into Alvirah's eyes, then turned away again. She didn't even see me, Alvirah decided. The 50 to 60 foot distance between them did not prevent her from realizing that waves of pain and despair were radiating from the young woman. Clearly it was time to see if she could help. I think I'll just introduce myself to our neighbor, she said to Willy. There's something up with her. She walked down the steps and strolled over to the hedge. Hello, she said in her friendliest voice. I saw you drive in. We've been here for 2 hours, so I guess that makes us the welcoming committee. I'm Alvirah Meehan. The young woman turned, and Alvirah felt instant compassion. She looked as though she had been ill, that ghostly pallor, the soft, unused muscles of her arms and legs. I don't mean to be rude, but I came here to be... Wrong, people. It's fine.
What?
I just assumed she was like, I don't mean to be rude, but you look like you're dying. I thought that's what she was going to say.
I thought she was going to say too.
And so I started talking like her and not just some random gaunt, sad woman.
Oh, I'm so sad.
Sorry, random, gaunt, sad woman. I don't mean to be rude, but I came here to be alone, not to be neighborly, she said quietly. Excuse me, please. That probably would have been the end of it, as Alvirah later observed, except that as she spun on her heel, the girl tripped over a footstool and fell heavily onto the porch. Alvirah rushed to help her up, refused to allow her to go into her cottage unaided, and, feeling responsible for the accident, wrapped an ice pack around her rapidly swelling wrist. By the time she had satisfied herself that the wrist was only sprained and made her a cup of tea, Alvirah had learned that her name was Cynthia Rogers, and that she was a school teacher from Illinois. That piece of information hit with a resounding thud on Alvirah's ears, because, as she told Willy, when she returned to their place an hour later, within 10 minutes, she'd recognized their neighbor. The poor girl may call herself Cynthia Rogers, Alvirah confided to Willy, but her real name is Cynthia Latham. She was found guilty of murdering her stepfather 12 years ago. He had big bucks and was well known. All the papers carried the story. I remember it like it was yesterday. You remember everything like it was yesterday, Willy commented. That's the truth. And you know I always read about murders. Anyhow, this one happened here on Cape Cod. Cynthia swore she was innocent, and she always said there was a witness who could prove she'd been out of the house at the time of the murder, but the jury didn't believe her story. I wonder why she came back. I'll have to call the Globe and have Charlie Evans send me the files on the case. She's probably just been released from prison. Her complexion is pure gray. Maybe. And now Alvira's eyes became thoughtful. She's up here because she really is innocent and is still looking for that missing witness to prove her story. To Willy's dismay, Alvirah opened the top drawer of the dresser, took out her sunburst pin with the hidden microphone, and began to dial her editor's direct line in New York. I'm also going to start drinking for every time the pin is mentioned.
Yep.
So fucking often. Did you know it has a microphone in it? That night, Willy and Alvirah ate at the Red Pheasant Inn. Alvirah wore a beige and blue print dress she had bought at Bredgeford Goodman, but which, as she remarked to Willy, somehow didn't look much different on her than the print dress she'd bought in Alexander's just before they won the lottery. "It's my full figure," she lamented as she spread butter on a warm cranberry muffin.
Okay, that's funny. But also, yeah, duh, fashion sucks. It's a lie.
$50 for a t-shirt, I just bitch. My, these muffins are good. And, Willy, I'm glad that you bought that yellow linen jacket. It shows up your blue eyes, and you still have a fine head of hair. I feel like a 200-pound canary, Willy commented, but as long as you like it. After dinner, they went to the Cape Playhouse and thrilled to the performance of Debbie Reynolds in a new comedy being tried out for Broadway. At intermission, as they sipped ginger ale on the grass outside the theater, Alvirah told Willy how she'd always enjoyed Debbie Reynolds from the time Debbie was a kid doing musicals with Mickey Rooney, and that it was a terrible thing Eddie Fisher ditched her when they had those two small babies. And what good did it do him? Alvirah philosophized as the warning came to return to their seats for the second act. He never had much luck after that. People who don't do the right thing usually don't win in the end. That comment led Alvirah to wonder whether Charlie had sent the information on their neighbor by express mail. She was anxious to read it. As Alvirah and Willy were enjoying Debbie Reynolds, Cynthia Latham was at last beginning to realize that she was really free, that 12 years of prison were behind her. 12 years ago, she'd been about to start her junior year at the Rhode Island School of Design when her stepfather, Stuart Richards, was found shot to death in the study of his mansion, a stately 18th century captain's house in Dennis. That afternoon, Cynthia had driven past the house on her way to the cottage and pulled off the road to study it. Who was there now? She wondered. Had her stepsister Lillian sold it, or had she kept it? It had been in the Richards family for 3 generations, but Lillian had never been sentimental, and since Cynthia had pressed her foot on the accelerator, chilled at the rush of memories of that awful night and the days that followed, the accusation, the arrest, arraignment, trial, her early confidence. I can absolutely prove that I left the house at 8 o'clock and didn't get home till past midnight. I was on a date. Now Cynthia shivered and wrapped the light blue woolen robe more tightly around her slender body. She'd weighed 125 pounds when she went to prison. Her present weight, 110, was not enough for her 5'8" height.
Oh my god.
Her hair, once a dark blonde, had changed in those years to a medium brown. Drab, she thought as she brushed it. Her eyes, the same shade of hazel as her mother's, were listless and vacant. At lunch that last day, Stuart Richards had said, "You look more like your mother all the time. I should have had the brains to hang on to her." Her mother had been married to Stuart from the time Cynthia was 8 until she was 12, the longer of his 2 marriages. Lillian, his only birth child, 10 years older than Cynthia, had lived with her mother in New York and seldom visited the Cape. Cynthia had laid the brush on the dresser. Had it been a crazy impulse to come here? 2 weeks out of a prison, barely enough money to live on for 6 months, not knowing what she could do or would do with the rest of her life. Should she have spent so much to rent this cottage? To rent a car? Was there any point to it? What did she hope to accomplish? A needle in a haystack, she thought. Walking into the small parlor, she reflected that compared to Stuart's mansions, this house was tiny, but after years of confinement it seemed palatial. Outside, the sea breeze was blowing the bay into churning waves. Cynthia walked out on the porch, only vaguely aware of her throbbing wrist, hugging her arms against the chill. But oh God, to breathe fresh, clean air, to know that if she wanted to get up at dawn and walk the beach the way she had as a child, no one could stop her. The moon, 3/4 full, looking as though a wedge had been neatly sliced from it, made the bay glisten, a silvery midnight blue. But where the moon did not reach it, the water appeared dark and impenetrable. Cynthia stared unseeingly as her mind wrenched her back to the terrible night when Stuart was murdered. Then she shook her head. No, she would not allow herself to think about that now, not tonight. This was a time to let the peace of this place fill her soul. She would go to bed, and she'd leave the windows wide open so that the cool night wind would pour into her room, making her pull the covers closer around her, deepening her sleep. Tomorrow morning she would wake up early and walk on the beach. She'd feel the wet sand under her feet, and she'd look for shells, just as she had when she was a child. Tomorrow, yes, she'd give herself the morning to help bridge her re-entry into the world, to regain her sense of equilibrium, and then she would begin the quest, probably hopeless, for the one person who would know that she had told the truth. The next morning, as Alvirah prepared breakfast, Willy drove to get the morning papers. When he returned, he was also carrying a bag of still-hot blueberry muffins. "I asked around," he told a delighted Alvirah. "Everyone said to go to the mercantile behind the post office for the best muffins on the Cape." They ate at the picnic table on the deck. As she nibbled on her second blueberry muffin, Alvirah studied the early morning joggers on the beach. "Look, there she is." "There who is?" "Cynthia Latham. She's been gone at least an hour and a half. I bet she's starving." When Cynthia ascended the steps from the beach to her deck, she was met by a beaming Alvirah, who linked her arm in Cynthia's. "I make the best coffee and fresh squeezed orange juice, and wait till you taste the blueberry muffins." "I really don't want—" Cynthia tried to pull back, but was propelled across the lawn. Willy jumped up to pull out a bench for her. "How's your wrist?" he asked. "Alvirah's been real upset that you sprained it when she went over to visit." Cynthia realized that her mounting irritation was being overcome by the genuine warmth she saw in both their faces. Willy, with his rounded cheeks, strong, pleasant expression, and thick mane of white hair, reminded her of Tip O'Neill. She told him that. Willy beamed. "Fellow just remarked that in the bakery, only difference is that while Tip was Speaker of the House, I was Savior at the outhouse. I'm a retired plumber."
Oh, Willy.
As Cynthia sipped the fresh orange juice and the coffee and picked at the muffin, she listened with disbelief, then awe, as Alvirah told her about winning the lottery, going to Cypress Point Spa, and helping to track down a murderer, then going on an Alaskan cruise, and figuring out who killed the man who sat next to her at the community table. God, she just does not stop. Oh, gonna kill me. She accepted a second cup of coffee. "You've told me all this for a reason, haven't you?" Cynthia said. "You recognized me yesterday, didn't you?" Alvirah's expression became serious. "Yes." Cynthia pushed back her bench. "You've been very kind, and I think you want to help me, but the best way you can do that is to leave me alone. I have a lot of things to work out, but I have to do them myself. Thank you for breakfast." Alvirah watched the slender young woman walk between the two cottages. "She got a little sun this morning," she observed. "Very becoming. When she fills out a little, she'll be a beautiful girl." What?
Fuck you.
Hun.
Oh my god.
"You may as well plan on getting the sun, too," Willie observed. "You heard her." "Oh, forget it. Once Charlie sends the files on her case, I'll figure out a way to help her." "Oh my God," Willie moaned. "I might have known. Here we go again." "I don't know how Charlie does it," Alvirah sighed approvingly an hour later. The overnight express mail envelope had just arrived. "It looks as though he sent every word anyone ever wrote about the case." She made a tisk-tisking sound. "Look at this picture of Cynthia at the trial. She was just a scared kid." Methodically, Alvirah began sorting the clippings on the table. Then she got out her lined pad and pen and began to make notes. Willie was reclining on the padded chaise he had claimed for his own, deeply immersed in the sports section of the Cape Cod Times. "I'm just about ready to give up on the Mets getting the pennant," he commented sadly, shaking his head. He looked up for reassurance, but it was clear that Alvirah had not heard him. At 1 o'clock, Willie went out again, returning this time with a quart of lobster bisque. Over lunch, Alvirah filled him in on what she had learned. "In a nutshell, here are the facts. Cynthia's mother was a widow when she married Stuart Richards. Cynthia was 8 at the time. They divorced 4 years later. Richards had one child by his first marriage, a daughter named Lillian. She was 10 years older than Cynthia and lived with her mother in New York." "Why'd Cynthia's mother divorce Richards?" Willie asked between sips of the bisque. "From what Cynthia said on the witness stand, Richards was one of those men who always belittled women. Her mother would be dressed to go out, and he'd reduce her to tears by ridiculing what she was wearing. That kind of thing. Sounds like he just about gave her a nervous breakdown. Apparently, though, he had always been fond of Cynthia, always taking her out around her birthday and giving her presents. Then Cynthia's mother died, and Richards invited the young girl to visit him here at Cape Cod. Actually, she wasn't so young by then. She was about to start her junior year at the Rhode Island School of Design. Her mother had been sick for a while, and there apparently wasn't much money left. She said she was planning on dropping out of school and working for a year or two. She claimed that Stuart told her that he'd always planned to leave half his money to his daughter Lillian and the other half to Dartmouth College. But he stayed so angry after the Dartmouth let women in as a full-time students that he changed his will. She said he told her he was leaving the Dartmouth portion of his estate about $10 million. Or leaving her the Dartmouth portion of his estate, about $10 million. The prosecutor got Cynthia to admit that Richards had also told her she'd have to wait for him to die to get it, that it was too bad about college, but that her mother should have provided her for her education. Willie put down his spoon. "So there's your motive, huh?" "That's what the prosecutor said about Cynthia had wanted the money right away. Anyhow, a guy named Ned Cretan happened to drop in to visit Richards and overheard their conversation. He was a friend of Lillian's, about her age. Cynthia apparently had known him slightly from what she and her mother had lived with Richards at the Cape. So Cretan invited Cynthia to have dinner with him, and Stuart urged her to go." According to her testimony, she and Cretan had dinner at the captain's table in Hyannis, and then he suggested they go for a ride in his boat, which was anchored at a private dock. She said they were out on the Nantucket Sound when the boat broke down. Nothing was working, not even the radio. They were stranded until nearly 11, when he was finally able to get the motor going again. She apparently had only had a salad at dinner, so once they made ashore, she asked him to stop for a hamburger. She testified that Cretin wasn't very happy about having to stop on the way home, although he did finally pull in at some hamburger joint around Cartwit. Cynthia said she hadn't been on the Cape since she was a child and didn't know the area that well, so she wasn't sure exactly where they stopped. Anyway, he told her to wait in the car, that he would go in and get the burger. All that she remembered about being there was a lot of rock music blaring and seeing teenagers all over the place. But then a woman drove up and parked the car next to her car, and when she opened her door, it slammed into the side of Cretin's car. Alvirah handed Willy a clipping. That woman, then, is the witness no one could find. As Alvirah absent-mindedly sipped the bisque, Willy scanned the paper. The woman had apologized profusely and had examined Ned's car for scratches. When she found none, she had headed into the hamburger joint. According to Cynthia, the woman had been in her mid to late 40s, chunky, with blunt-cut hair dyed an orange-red shade, and she'd been wearing a shapeless blouse and elastic-waisted polyester slacks. The clipping went on to recount Cynthia's testimony that Cretin had returned complaining about the line for food and about kids who couldn't make up their minds when they gave an order. She said he'd been obviously edgy, so she didn't tell him at the time about the woman banging the door into his car. On the witness stand, Cynthia had testified that during the 45-minute drive back to Dennis, all of it along unfamiliar roads, Ned Cretin had hardly said a word to her. Then once they reached Stuart Richards' house, he'd just dropped her off and driven away. When Cynthia went into the house, she'd found Stuart in his study, sprawled on the floor next to his desk, blood drenching his forehead, blood caked on his face, blood matting the carpet beside him. Willy read more of the account. The defendant stated that she thought Richards had a stroke and had fallen, but that when she brushed his hair back, she saw the bullet wound in his forehead, then spotted the gun lying next to him, and she telephoned the police. She said she thought then that he had committed suicide, Alvirah recounted. But then she picked up the gun, of course putting her fingerprints on it. The armoire in the study was open, and she admitted that she knew Richards kept a gun in it. Then Cretin contradicted just about everything she had told the police, saying that, yes, he had taken her out to dinner, but that he had gotten her home by 8 o'clock, and that all through the meal, she had gone on about how she blamed Stuart Richards for her mother's illness and death, and that she intended to have it out with him when she got home. The time of death was established at about 9 o'clock, which of course looked bad for her, given Cretin's contrary testimony. And even though her lawyers advertised for the woman she'd met at the burger joint, nobody came forward to verify her story. "So, do you believe Cynthia?" Willy asked. "You know an awful lot of murderers can't face the reality of what they've done and actually end up believing their own lies, or at least go through the motions of trying to confirm them. She could just be looking for this missing witness in an effort to finally convince people of her innocence. Even though she's already served her time. I mean, why on earth would Ned Cretin lie about the whole thing?" "I don't know," Alvirah said, shaking her head. "But you can be sure that somebody is lying, and I'll bet my bottom dollar that it isn't Cynthia. If I were in her boots, I'd set off to try and find out what it was that made Cretin lie. What was in it for him." With that, Alvirah turned her attention to the bisque, not speaking again until she had finished it off. "My, that was good. What a great vacation we're going to have, Willy. And isn't it wonderful that we took this cottage right next to Cynthia so that I'm here to help her clear her name?" Willy's only response was the clatter of a spoon and a deep sigh. The long and peaceful night's sleep, followed by the early morning walk, had begun to clear the emotional paralysis that Cynthia had experienced from that moment 12 years earlier when she had heard the jury pronounce the verdict guilty. Now as she showered and dressed, she reflected that these past years had been a nightmare in which she had managed to survive only by freezing her emotions. She had been a model prisoner. She had kept to herself, resisting friendships. She had taken whatever jailhouse college courses were offered. She had graduated from working in the laundry and the kitchen to desk assignments in the library and assistant teaching in the art class. And after a while, when the awful reality of what had happened finally set in, she begun to draw. The face of the woman in the parking lot, the hamburger stand, Ned's boat, every detail she could force from her memory. When she was finished, she had pictures of a hamburger place that could be found anywhere in the United States, a boat that looked like any Chris Craft of that year. The woman was a little more clearly defined, but not much. It had been dark. Their encounter had lasted only seconds, but the woman was her only hope. The prosecutor's summation at the end of the trial. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Cynthia Latham returned to the home of Stuart Richards sometime between 8 and 8:30 p.m. on the night of August 2nd, 1981. She went into her stepfather's study that very afternoon. Stuart Richards had told Cynthia he had changed his will. Ned Cretan heard that conversation, overheard Cynthia and Stuart's quarreling. She needed money immediately to pay for her education and demanded that he help her. That evening, Vera Smith, the waitress at the captain's table, overheard Cynthia tell Ned that she would have to drop out of school. Cynthia Latham returned to the Richards mansion that night, angry and worried. She went into the study and confronted Stuart Richards. He was a man who enjoyed upsetting the people around him. He had changed his will to include her, but she knew it would be just like him to change it again. And the anger she'd harbored for the way he had treated her mother, the anger that rose in her at the thought of having to leave school, at being turned out into the world virtually penniless, made her go to the armoire where she knew he kept a gun, take out that gun, and fire 3 shots point blank into the forehead of the man who loved her enough to make her an heiress. It is ironic. It is tragic. It is also murder. Cynthia begged Ned Cretan to say that she had spent the evening with him on his boat. No one saw them out on the boat. She talks about stopping at a hamburger stand, but she doesn't know where it is. She admits she never entered it. She talks about a stranger with red-orange hair to whom she spoke in a parking lot. With all the publicity this case has engendered, whatever, why didn't that woman come forward? You know the reason. Because she doesn't exist. Because like the hamburger stand and the hours spent on a boat on Nantucket Sound, she is a figment of Cynthia Latham's imagination. Cynthia had read the transcript of the trial too often that she had the district attorney's summation committed to memory. But the woman didn't exist, Cynthia said aloud. She does exist. For the next 6 months, with little insurance money left her by her mother, she was going to try to find that woman. She might be dead by now, or moved to California, Cynthia thought as she brushed her hair and twisted it into a chignon. I'm also going to drink that because everyone just loves that thing.
Like, is it one of those 4 twists or is it
probably,
one of those 2 twist ones?
I don't know and I don't care.
I know,
It's just some kind of braid.
Shit.
The bedroom of the cottage faced the sea. Cynthia walked to the sliding door and pulled it open. On the beach below, she could see couples walking with children. If she was ever to have a normal life, a husband, a child of her own, she had to clear her name. Jeff Knight. She had met him last year when he came to do a series of television interviews with women in prison. He'd invited her to participate, and she'd flatly refused. He'd persisted, his strong, intelligent face filled with concern. Don't you understand, Cynthia? This program is going to be watched by a couple of million people in New England. The woman who saw you that night might and could be one of those people. That was why she finally had agreed to go on the program, had answered his questions, told about the night Stuart died, held up the shadowy sketch of the woman she had spoken with, the sketch of the hamburger stand, and no one had come forward. From New York, Lillian issued a statement saying that the truth had been told at the trial, and she would have no further comment. Ned Cretan, now the owner of the Moon Cusser, a popular restaurant in Barnstable, repeated how very, very sorry he was for Cynthia. After the program, Jeff kept coming to see her on visiting days. Only those visits had kept her from total despair when the program produced no results. He would always arrive a little rumpled looking, his wide shoulders straining at his jacket, his unsettled dark brown hair curling on his forehead, his brown eyes intense and kind, his long legs never able to find enough room in the cramped visiting area of the prison. What the fuck does that even mean? Goddamn horny-ass bitches when they write their stupidly unnecessary characters.
And they're sexy and quiet.
The legs are so long, they are cramped in a building that most definitely has an 8-foot... Oh, fuck yeah, whatever. When he asked her to marry him after her release, she told him to forget her. He was already getting bids from the networks. He didn't need a convicted murderer in his life. But what if I weren't a convicted murderer? Cynthia thought as she turned away from the window. She went over to the maple dresser, reached for her pocketbook, and went outside to her rented car. It was early evening before she returned to Dennis. The frustration of the wasted hours had finally brought tears to her eyes. She let them run down her cheeks unchecked. She'd driven to Cochwit, walked around the main street, inquired of the bookstore owner, who seemed to be a long-time native, about a hamburger stand that was a teenage hangout. Where would she be likely to find one? The answer, with a shrug, was, "They come and go. Developer picks up property and builds a shopping center or condominiums, and the hamburger stand is out." She'd gone to the town hall to try to find records of food service licenses issued or renewed around that time. 2 hamburger joint-type places were still in business. A third had been converted or torn down. Nothing stirred her memory, and of course she couldn't even be sure they had been in Cochwit. Ned might have been lying about that too. And how do you ask strangers if they know a middle-aged woman with orange-red hair and a chunky build who had lived or summered on the Cape and hated rock and roll music? As she drove through Dennis, Cynthia impulsively ignored the turn to the cottage and again drove past the Richards' home. As she was passing, a slender blonde woman came down the steps of the mansion. Even from this distance, she knew it was Lillian. Cynthia slowed the car to a crawl, but when Lillian looked in her direction, she quickly accelerated and returned to the cottage. As she was turning the key in the lock, she heard the phone ring. It rang 10 times before it stopped. It had to be Jeff, and she didn't want to talk to him. A few minutes later, it rang again. It was obvious that if Jeff had the number, he wouldn't give up trying to reach her. Cynthia picked up the receiver. "Hello?" "My finger is getting very tired pushing buttons," Jeff said. "Nice trick of yours, just disappearing like that." "How did you find me?" "It wasn't hard. I knew you'd head for the Cape like a homing pigeon, and your parole officer confirmed it." She could see him leaning back in his chair, twirling a pencil, the seriousness in his eyes belying the lightness of his tone. "Jeff, forget about me, please. Just do us both a favor." "Negative, Cindy. I understand. But unless you can find that woman you spoke to, there's no hope of proving your innocence. And believe me, honey, I tried to find her. When I did the program, I sent out investigators I never told you about. If they couldn't find her, you won't be able to. I love you. You know you're innocent." Ned Cretan lied, but we'll never be able to prove it. Cindy closed her eyes, knowing that what Jeff said was true. "Cindy, give it all up. Pack your bag, drive back here. I'll pick you up at your place at 8 o'clock tonight."
The end.
End of story!
It should be. I don't know why the fuck she cares. This handsome, long-legged guy likes her so much, and she's like, "No, just do it for me."
Her place. The furnished room the parole officer had helped her select. "Meet my girlfriend. She just got out of prison. What did your mother do before she got married? She was in jail." "Goodbye, Jeff," Cynthia said. She broke the connection, left the phone off the hook, and turned her back to it. Alvirah had observed Cynthia's return, but did not attempt to contact her. In the afternoon, Willy had gone out on a half-day charter boat and returned triumphantly with 2 bluefish. During his absence, Alvirah again studied the newspaper clippings of the Stuart Richards murder case. At Cypress Point Spa. Drinky-de-drinky-de-drinky. I mean, at this point, you could just say the spa, you know?
No. It could be a spa at the Cape.
At Cypress Point Spa, she had learned the value of airing her opinions into a recorder. That afternoon, she kept her recorder busy. The crux of this case is, why did Ned Cretan lie? He hardly knew Cynthia. Why did he set her up to take the blame for Stuart Richards' death? Stuart Richards had a lot of enemies. Ned's father at one time had business dealings with Stuart, and they'd had a falling out, but Ned was only a kid at that time. Ned was a friend of Lillian Richards. Lillian swore that she didn't know that her father was going to change his will, that she'd always known she would get half his estate, and that the other half was going to Dartmouth College. She said she knew he was upset after Dartmouth decided to accept women students, but didn't know he was upset enough to finally change his will and leave the Dartmouth money to Cynthia. Alvirah turned off the recorder. It certainly must have occurred to someone that when Cynthia was found guilty of murdering her stepfather, she would lose her inheritance and Lillian would receive everything. Lillian had married somebody from New York shortly after the trial was over. She'd been divorced 3 times since then, so it didn't look as though Ned and she had ever had any romance going. That left only the restaurant. Who were Ned's backers? Motive for Ned to lie, she thought. Who gave him the money to open his restaurant? Willy came in from the deck, carrying the bluefish fillets he prepared. "Still at it?" he asked. "Uh-huh." Alvirah picked up one of the clippings. Orange-red hair, chunky build, in her late 40s. Would you say that description might have fit me 12 years ago? "Now, you know I would never call you chunky," Willy protested. "I didn't say you would. I'll be right back. I want to talk to Cynthia. I saw her coming in a few minutes ago." The next afternoon, after having packed Willy off on another charter fishing boat, Alvirah attached her sunburst pin
Jesus.
Alvirah attached her sunburst pin to her new purple print dress and drove with Cynthia to the Mooncusser restaurant in Barnstaple. Along the way, Alvirah coached her. "Now remember, if he's there, point him out to me right away. I'll keep staring at him. He'll recognize you. He's bound to come over. You know what to say, don't you?" I do. Was it possible? Cynthia wondered. Would Ned believe them? The restaurant was an impressive white colonial-style building with a long, winding driveway. Alvirah took in the building, the exquisitely landscaped property that extended to the water. "Very, very expensive," she said to Cynthia. "He didn't start this place on a shoestring." The interior... I'm going to drink for that. Just because, oh my god, of course. Alright, it's just nothing funnier than bitches being like, "It's expensive." Yeah, I can see.
I know. These books are made for... I just don't get why you like gardens and eating food so much. I like gardens and eating food too, but there's a hoity-toity to it.
The interior was decorated in Wedgwood blue and white. The paintings on the wall were fine ones. For 20 years, until she and Willy hit the lottery, Alvirah had cleaned every Tuesday for Mrs. Rawlings, and her house was one big museum. Mrs. Rawlings enjoyed recounting the history of each painting, how much she paid for it then, and, gleefully, how much it was worth right now. Alvirah often thought that with a little practice, she could probably be a tour guide at an art museum. Observe the use of lighting, the splendid details of sun rays brightening the dust on the table. She had the Rawlings spiel down pat. Knowing Cynthia was nervous, Alvirah tried to distract her by telling her about Mrs. Rawlings after the maitre d' hotel escorted them to a window table. Cynthia felt a reluctant smile come to her lips as Alvirah told her that, with all her money, Mrs. Rawlings never once gave her so much as a postcard for Christmas. Meanest, cheapest old biddy in the world, but I felt kind of sorry for her, Alvirah said. No one else would work for her, but when my time comes, I intend to point out to the Lord that I get a lot of Rawlings points in my plus column.
Oh my god, that's great.
If this idea works, you get a lot of Latham points in your plus column, Cynthia said. You bet I do. Now, don't lose that smile. You've got to look like the cat who ate the canary. Is he here? I haven't seen him yet. Good. When that stuffed shirt comes back with the menu, ask for him. The maitre d' was approaching them, a professional smile on his bland face. May I offer you a beverage? Yes, 2 glasses of white wine, and is Mr. Cretan here? Cynthia asked. I believe he's in the kitchen speaking with the chef. I'm an old friend, Cynthia said. Ask him to drop by when he's free. Certainly. You could be an actress, Alvirah whispered, holding the menu in front of her face. She always felt that you had to be so careful because someone might be able to read lips. And I'm glad that I made you buy that outfit this morning. What you had in your closet was hopeless. You made her buy an outfit to go possibly find a man to prove her innocence.
Cool.
You're a cunt.
We could sip off this if you want.
I was fine. I was actually just going to stop for him, I think.
Oh, just right there, that fucking line.
Well, okay, whatever. Cynthia was wearing a short, lemon-colored linen jacket and a black linen skirt. A splashy yellow, black, and white silk scarf was dramatically tied on one shoulder. Alvirah had also escorted her to the beauty parlor. Now Cynthia's collar-length hair was blown soft and loose around her face. A light beige foundation covered her abnormal paleness and returned color to her wide hazel eyes. Returned color to her wide hazel eyes. Wow. You're gorgeous, Alvirah said. Regretfully, Alvirah had undergone a different metamorphosis. She'd had her Sassoon hair color changed back to its old orange-red and cut unevenly. She had also had the tips removed from her nails and had left them unpolished. After helping Cynthia select the yellow and black outfit, she'd gone to the sale rack, where for every good reasons the purple print she was wearing had been reduced to $10. The fact that it was a size too small for her accentuated the bulges that Willy always explained were only nature's way of padding us for the last big fall. That's not the funniest way. It's okay, you're fat, babe.
I also don't get it. 'Cause I would never call you chunky. I'm like, well, wouldn't you? I thought you all like to be chunky together. That's what I mean. I'm imagining Chuck and Viola.
That's what
I thought they liked to be chunky.
When Cynthia, I'll just do this a little bit, whatever. When Cynthia protested the desecration of her nails and hairdo, Alvirah simply said, every time you talked about that woman, the missing witness, you said she was chunky, had dyed red hair, and was dressed like someone who shopped from a pushcart. I've got to be believable. I said her outfit looked inexpensive, Cynthia corrected. Same thing.
Bitch.
Now Alvirah watched as Cynthia's smile faded. He's coming? She asked quickly. Cynthia nodded. Smile at me. Come on, relax. Don't show him you're nervous. Cynthia rewarded her with a warm smile and leaned her elbows lightly on the table. A man was standing over them. Beads of perspiration were forming on his forehead. He moistened his lips. Cynthia, how good to see you. He reached for her hand. Alvirah studied him intently. Not bad looking, in a weak kind of way. Narrow eyes almost lost in puffy flesh. He was a good 20 pounds heavier than in the pictures in the files. One of the kind who are handsome as kids, and after that it's all downhill, Alvirah decided.
I love it. She's such a bitch.
Love
Love it.
Is it good to see me, Ned? Cynthia asked, still smiling. That's him, Alvirah announced emphatically. I'm absolutely sure. He was ahead of me online in the hamburger joint. I noticed him because he was sore as hell that the kids in front were hemming and hawing about what they wanted on their burgers. What are you talking about? Ned Cretan demanded. Why don't you sit down, Ned? Cynthia said. I know this is your place, but I still feel as though I should entertain you. After all, you did buy me dinner one night 8 years ago. Good girl, Alvirah thought. I'm absolutely sure it was you that night, even though you've put on weight. She snapped indignantly to Cretan. It's a crying shame that because of your lies, this girl had to spend 12 years of her life in prison. The smile vanished from Cynthia's face. 12 years, 6 months, and 10 days, she corrected. All my 20s, when I should have been finishing college, getting my first job, dating. Ned Cretan's face hardened. You're bluffing. This is a cheap trick. The waiter arrived with 2 glasses of wine and placed them before Cynthia and Alvirah. Mr. Cretan? Cretan glared at him. Nothing. This is really a lovely place, Ned, Cynthia said quietly. An awful lot of money must have gone into it. Where'd you get it? From Lillian? My share of Stuart Richards' estate was nearly $10 million. How much did she give you? She did not wait for an answer. Ned, this woman is the witness I could never find. She remembers talking to me that night. Nobody believed me when I told them about a woman slamming her car door against the side of your car, but she remembers doing it. And she remembers seeing you very well. All her life she's kept a daily diary. That night she wrote about what had happened in the parking lot. As she kept nodding her head in agreement, Alvirah studied Ned's face. He's getting rattled, she thought, but he's not convinced. It was time for her to take over. I left the Cape the very next day, she said. I live in Arizona. My husband was sick, real sick. That's why we never did come back. I lost him last year. Sorry, Willy, she thought, but this is important. Then last week, I was watching television, and you know how boring television usually is in the summer. Well, you could have knocked me over with a feather when I saw a rerun of that show about women in prison, and then my own picture right there on the screen. Cynthia reached for the envelope she had placed beside her chair. This is the picture I drew of the woman I had spoken to in the parking lot. Ned Cretan reached for it. I'll hold it, Cynthia said. The sketch showed a woman's face framed by an open car window. The features were shadowy and the background was dark, but the likeness to Alvirah was astonishing. Cynthia pushed back her chair. Alvirah rose with her. You can't give me back 12 years. I know what you're thinking. Even with this proof, a jury might not believe me. They didn't believe me 12 years ago, but they might, just might, now. And I don't think you should take that chance, Ned. I think you better talk it over with whoever paid you to set me up that night and tell them that I want $10 million. That's my rightful share of Stuart's estate. You're crazy. Anger had driven the fear from Ned Cretan's face. Am I? I don't think so. Cynthia reached into her pocket. Here's my address and phone number. Alvirah is staying with me. Call me by 7 tonight. If I don't hear from you, I'm hiring a lawyer and getting my case reopened. She threw a $10 bill on the table. That should pay for the wine. Now we're even for that dinner you bought me. She walked rapidly from the restaurant, Alvirah a step behind her. Alvirah was aware of the buzz from diners at the other tables. They know something's up, she thought. Good. She and Cynthia did not speak until they were in the car. Then Cynthia asked shakily, How was I? Great! Alvirah, it just won't work. If they check the sketch that Jeff showed on the program, they'll see all the details I added to make it look like you. They haven't got time to do that. Are you sure you saw your stepsister yesterday at the Richards' house? Absolutely. Then my guess is that Ned Cretan is talking to her right now. Cynthia drove automatically, not seeing the sunny brightness of the afternoon. Stuart was despised by a lot of people. Why are you so sure Lillian is involved? Alvirah unfastened the zipper on the purple print. This dress is so tight, I swear I'm going to choke. Ruefully, she ran her hand through her erratically chopped hair. It'll take an army of Sassoons to put me back together after this. I guess I'll have to go back to Cypress Point Spa. What did you ask? Oh, Lillian. Yeah, she has to be involved. Look at it this way. Your stepfather had a lot of people who hated his guts, but they wouldn't need a Ned Cretan to set you up. Lillian always knew her father was leaving half his money to Dartmouth College, right? Yes. Cynthia turned down the road that led to the cottages. I don't care how many people might have hated your stepfather. Lillian was the only one who benefited by you being set up to be found guilty of his murder. She knew Ned. Ned was trying to raise money to open a restaurant. Her father must have told her he was leaving half his fortune to you instead of Dartmouth. She always hated you. You told me that. So she makes a deal with Ned. He takes you out on his boat and pretends that it breaks down. Somebody kills Stuart Richards. Lillian had an alibi. She was in New York. Probably hired someone to kill her father. You almost spoiled everything that night by insisting on having a hamburger. And Ned didn't know you'd spoken to anyone. They must have been plenty scared that witness would show up.
Killed him.
Suppose someone recognized him that night and said they'd see him buying the burger. In that case, he'd have said that he went out on his boat and stopped afterwards for a hamburger. And you were so desperate for an alibi, you begged him to say you were with him, but no one came forward. It sounds so risky, Cynthia protested. Not risky, simple, Alvirah corrected. Believe me, I've studied up on this a lot. You'd be amazed on how many cases the one who commits the murder is the chief mourner at the funeral. It's a fact.
Oh my god.
Love it. They had arrived back at the cottages. What now? Cynthia asked. Now we go to your place and wait for your stepsister to phone. Alvirah shook her head at Cynthia. You still don't believe me. Wait and see. I'll make us a nice cup of tea. It's too bad Cretan showed up before we had lunch. That was a good menu. Fucking Jesus. I must drink for everything. It's amazing. She's an amazing bitch. I mean, I would be thinking that too. I love food so much. They were eating tuna salad sandwiches on the deck of Cynthia's cottage when the phone rang. Lillian, for you, Alvirah said. She followed Cynthia into the kitchen as Cynthia answered the call. Hello? Cynthia's voice was almost a whisper. Alvirah watched as the color drained from her face. Hello, Lillian. Alvirah squeezed Cynthia's arm and nodded her head vigorously. Yes, Lillian, I just saw Ned. No, I'm not joking. I don't see anything funny about this. Yes, I'll come over tonight. Don't bother about dinner. Your presence has a way of making my throat close. And Lillian, I told Ned what I want. I won't change my mind. Cynthia hung up and sank into a chair. Alvirah, Lillian said that my accusation was ridiculous, but that she knows her father could drive anyone to the point of losing control. She's smart. That doesn't help us clear your name. I'll give you my sunburst pin so you can record the conversation. You gotta get her to admit that you had absolutely nothing to do with the murder, that she set Ned up to trap you. What time did you tell her you'd go over to the house? 8 o'clock. Ned will be with her. Fine. Willy will go with you. He'll be on the floor in the back seat of the car. For a big man, he can sure roll himself into a beach ball. He'll keep an eye on you. They certainly won't try anything in that house. It would be too risky. Next to Willy, my sunburst pin is my greatest treasure, she said. I'll show you how to use it. Wow,
Push button.
2 sunburst pen drinks.
Well, I'm sorry.
And I don't know, just saying Willy can turn into a beach ball, that's pretty fucking drink worthy.
I'm dying over here. I'm starting to...
Jesus Christ.
Oh, these books make me so hungry, by the way. The food sounds fucking delicious.
Tuna salad.
They were eating bisque earlier, and then they keep talking about
just
muffins.
lobster bisque.
Lobster bisque and muffins? That sounds fucking dope.
Yeah, I guess that's pretty good. You know, you close up your throat over there.
I don't care. I'll take the risk. Get the cape.
Throughout the afternoon, Alvirah coached Cynthia on what to say to her stepsister. She's got to be the one who put up the money for the restaurant, probably through some sham investment companies. Tell her unless she pays up, you're going to contact a top accountant you know who used to work for the government. She knows I don't have any money. She doesn't know who might have taken an interest in your case. That fellow who did the program on women in prison did, right? Yeah, Jeff took an interest. Alvirah's eyes narrowed, then sparked. Something between you and Jeff? If I'm exonerated for Stuart Richards' death, yes. If I'm not, there'll never be anything between Jeff and me, or anyone else and me. Dramatic.
I still just don't get it. He's like, babe, I love you. Marry me. Marry
Babe,
me.
I like, maybe don't believe, maybe don't believe. Either way, I don't care.
And I like have money. Because also if you marry him, maybe he could help you even clear your fucking name.
So his name's Jeff. Strong name, Jeff. Drink from Jeff.
Your own jokes that you stole from a goddamn...
You know,
I
just meant like inside jokes.
Oh my god. I'm not accusing you of plagiarism.
Shuck off.
Shuck off?
Fuck off.
Oh, shuck off with the cape.
At 6 o'clock, the phone rang. Alvirah said, I'll answer. Let him know I'm here with you. Her booming, hello, was followed by a warm greeting. Jeff, we were just talking about you. Cynthia's right here. My, what a pretty girl. You should see her new outfit. She's been telling me all about you. Wait, I'll put her on. Alvirah frankly listened in as Cynthia explained. Alvirah rents the next cottage. She's helping me. No, I'm not coming back. Yes, there is a reason to stay here. Tonight, just maybe I'll be able to get proof I wasn't guilty of Stuart's death. No, don't come down. I don't want to see you, Jeff. Not now. Jeff, yes, I love you. Yes, if I clear my name, I'll marry you. Like, literally just, I gotta make sure I'm clear, babe.
Like, it doesn't matter. Like, I love how she's like, oh, this is Cynthia. Like, you know, her imagining being like, oh, this is Cynthia. She's been in prison. And I'm like, well, just because you've still been in prison for the last 12 years.
You've still been in prison for 12 years. That
like,
still
this isn't going to change your
garners a
career
reputation.
path.
Like, it still garners a reputation and career path, yeah.
Well, no, I'm saying, it's not, you can't just suddenly be like, my name's clear. And now, what have you been doing for the last 12 years?
Well, I was in prison.
I was in prison.
But because I was falsely accused. Cool, that's still 12 years of no work experience.
Well, yeah, but I'm just saying, like, you've still been in prison. It's still ghetto. Like, he doesn't care. Just marry the man.
Day.
Marry the man.
I also love that she's, of course, listening in. When Cynthia hung up, she was close to tears. Alvirah, I want to have a life with him so much. You know what he just said? He quoted the Highwayman. He said, I'll come to thee by moonlight, though hell should bar the way. I like him, Alvirah said flatly. I can read a person from his voice on the phone. Is he coming tonight? I don't want you getting upset or being talked out of this. No, he's been made anchorman for the 10 o'clock news, but I bet anything he drives down tomorrow. We'll see about that. The more people in this, the more chance of having Ned and Lillian smell a rat. Alvirah glanced out the window. "Oh, look! Here comes Willy. Stars above, he caught more of those darn bluefish. They gave me heartburn, but I'd never tell him. Whenever he goes fishing, I keep a package of Tums in my pocket. Oh, well."
Maybe he just can't cook fish.
Maybe. She opened the door and waved over a beaming Willy, who was proudly holding a line from which 2 limp bluefish dangled forlornly. Willy's smile vanished as he took in Alvirah's bright red mop of unruly hair and the purple print dress that squeezed her body into rolls of flesh. "Aw, nuts," he said. "How come they took back the lottery money?"
Oh my god. Ass attack.
Nice. Alright. At 7:30, after having dined on Willy's latest catch, Alvirah placed a cup of tea in front of Cynthia. "You haven't eaten a thing," she said. "You've got to eat to keep your brain clear. Now, have you got it all straight?" Cynthia fingered the sunburst pin. "I think so. It seems clear." "Remember, money had to have changed hands between those two, and I don't care how clever they were, it can be traced. If they agree to pay you, offer to come down in price if they'll give you the satisfaction of admitting the truth. Got it?" "Got it." At 7:50, Cynthia drove down the winding lane with Willy on the floor of the back seat. The brilliantly sunny day had turned into a cloudy evening. Alvirah walked through the cottage to the back deck. Wind was whipping the bay into a frenzy of waves that slammed onto the beach. The rumbling of thunder could be heard in the distance. The temperature had plummeted, and suddenly it felt more like October than August. Shivering, she debated about going next door to her own cottage and getting a sweater, then decided against it. In case anyone phoned, she wanted to be right here. She made a second cup of tea for herself and settled at the dinette table, her back to the door leading from the deck. Then she began writing a first draft of the article she was sure she would be sending to the New York Globe. Cynthia Latham, who was 19 years old when she was sentenced to a term of 12 years in prison for a murder she did not commit, can now prove her innocence. From behind her, a voice said, "Oh, I don't think that's going to happen." Alvirah swiveled around and stared up into the angry face of Ned Cretan. I have to drink for the sunburst pin. And Ned Cretan, because she did the exact same thing in the last book, where for some reason they show up in the house and they're like, "I don't think so, darling." I don't think so, see? Yeah, that's an issue with Ned Cretan. Ned Cretan, see? I don't know, I'm changing it to that. It's a drunk read. Cynthia waited on the porch steps of the Richards mansion. Through the handsome mahogany door, she could hear the faint sound of chimes. She had the incongruous thought that she still had her own key to this place, and she wondered if Lillian had changed the locks. The door swung open. Lillian was standing in the wide hallway, light from the overhead Tiffany lamp accentuating her high cheekbones, wide blue eyes, silvery blonde hair. Cynthia felt a chill through her body. In these 12 years, Lillian had become a clone of Stuart Richards. Smaller, of course, younger, but still a feminine version of his outstanding looks, and with that same hint of cruelty around the eyes. "Come in, Cynthia." Lillian's voice hadn't changed. Clear, well-bred, but with that familiar, sharp, angry undertone that had always characterized Stuart Richards' speech. Silently, Cynthia followed Lillian down the hallway. The living room was dimly lighted. It looked very much as she remembered it. The placement of the furniture, the oriental carpets, the painting over the fireplace, all were the same. The baronial dining room on the left still had the same unused appearance. They had usually eaten in the small dining room off the library. She had expected that Lillian would take her to the library. Instead, Lillian went directly back to the study where Stuart had died. Cynthia narrowed her hips. No. Oh, that's not right. Sorry. Cynthia narrowed her lips, felt for the sunburst pin. Was this an attempt to intimidate her? She wondered. Drinking for the pin. Shut up. Lillian sat behind the massive desk. Cynthia thought again of the night she'd come into this room and found Stuart sprawled on the carpet beside that desk. She knew her hands were clammy. Perspiration was forming on her forehead. Outside, she could hear the wind wailing as it increased in velocity. Lillian folded her hands and looked up at Cynthia. You might as well sit down. Cynthia bit her lip. The rest of her life would be determined by what she said in these next minutes. I think I'm the one who should suggest the seating arrangements, she told Lillian. Your father did leave this house to me. When you phoned, you talked about a settlement. Don't play games now. And don't try to intimidate me. Prison took all the shyness out of me. I promise you that. Where is Ned? He'll be along any minute, Cynthia. Those accusations you made to him are insane. You know that. I thought I came here to discuss receiving my share of Stuart's estate. You came here because I'm sorry for you and because I want to give you a chance to go away somewhere and begin a new life. I'm prepared to set up a trust fund that will give you a monthly income. Another woman wouldn't be so generous to her father's murderer. Cynthia stared at Lillian, taking in the contempt in her eyes, the icy calm of her demeanor. She had to break that calm. She walked over to the window and looked out. The rain was beating against the house. Claps of thunder shattered the silence in the room. I wonder what Ned would have done to keep me out of the house that night if it had been raining like this, she said. The weather worked out for him, didn't it? Warm and cloudy. No other boats nearby. Only that one witness. And now I've found her. Didn't Ned tell you that she positively identified him? How many people would believe that anyone could recognize a stranger after nearly 13 years? Cynthia, I don't know whom you've hired for this charade, but I'm warning you. Drop it. Accept my offer, or I'll call the police and have you arrested for harassment. Don't forget it's very easy to get a criminal's parole revoked. A criminal's parole. I agree, but I'm not a criminal, and you know it. Cynthia walked over to the Jacobean armoire and pulled open the top drawer. Always gotta say what it is. I knew Stuart kept a gun here, but you certainly knew too. You claimed he had never told you that he'd changed his will and was leaving the Dartmouth half of his estate to me, but you were lying. If Stuart sent for me to tell me about his will, he certainly didn't hide what he was doing from you. He did not tell me. I hadn't seen him for 3 months. You may not have seen him, but you spoke to him, didn't you? You could have put up with Dartmouth getting half his fortune, but you couldn't stand the idea of splitting his money with me. You hated me for the years I lived in this house, for the fact that he liked me while you two always clashed. You've got that same vile temper he had. Lillian stood up. You don't know what you're talking about. Cynthia slammed the drawer shut. Oh, yes, I do. And every fact that convicted me will convict you. I had a key to this house. You had a key. There was no sign of a struggle. I don't think you sent anyone to murder him. I think you did it yourself. Stuart had a panic button on his desk. He didn't push it. He never thought his own daughter would harm him. Why did Ned just happen to stop by that afternoon? You knew Stuart had invited me here for the weekend. You knew that he'd encounter... You knew that he'd encourage me to go out with Ned. Stuart liked company, and then he liked to be alone. Maybe Ned hasn't made it clear to you. That witness I found keeps a diary. She showed it to me. She's been writing it every night since she was 20. There was no way that entry could have been doctored. She described me. She described Ned's car. She even wrote about the noisy kids online and how impatient everyone was with them. I'm getting to her, Cynthia thought. Lillian's face was pale. Her throat was closing convulsively. Deliberately, Cynthia walked back to the desk so that the sunburst pin was pointed directly at Lillian. "You played it smart, didn't you?" she asked. "Ned didn't start pouring money into that restaurant until after I was safely in prison. And I'm sure that on the surface, he has some respectable investors. But today, the government is awfully good at getting to the source of laundered money. Your money, Lillian. You'll never prove it." But Lillian's voice had become shrill. "Oh God, if I can just get her to admit it," Cynthia thought. She grasped the edge of the desk with both hands and leaned forward. "Possibly not, but don't take the chance. Let me tell you how it feels to be fingerprinted and handcuffed. How it feels to sit next to a lawyer and hear the district attorney accuse you of murder. How it feels to study the faces of the jury. Jurors are ordinary-looking people. Old, young, black, white, well-dressed, shabby. But they hold the rest of your life in their hands. And Lillian, you won't like it. The waiting. The damning evidence that fits you much more than it ever fitted me. You don't have the temperament or the guts to go through with it." Lillian stood up. Her face was frozen in hatred. "Bear in mind there were a lot of taxes when the estate was settled. A good lawyer could probably destroy your so-called witness. But I don't need the scandal. Yeah, I'll give you your half." Then she smiled. "You should have stayed in Arizona," Ned Cretan said to Alvirah. The gun he was holding was pointed at her chest. Alvirah sat at the dinette table, measuring her chances to escape. There were none. He had believed her story this afternoon, and now he had to kill her. Alvirah had the fleeting thought that she'd always known she would have made a wonderful actress. Should she warn Ned her husband would be home any minute? No. At the restaurant, she told him she was a widow. How long would Willy and Cynthia be? Too long. Lillian wouldn't let Cynthia go until she was sure there was no witness alive, but maybe if Alvirah kept him talking, she'd think of something. "How much did you get for your part in the murder?" she asked. Ned Cretan smiled, a thin, sneering movement of his mouth. $3 million. Just enough to start a classy restaurant, see?" Alvirah mourned the fact that she had lent her sunburst pin to Cynthia. Proof. Absolute positive proof. And she wasn't able to record it. And if anything happened to her, no one would know. Mark my words, she thought. If I get out of this, I'm going to have Charlie Evans get me a backup pin. Maybe that one should be silver. No, platinum. Cretan waved his pistol. Get up. Alvirah pushed the chair, leaned her hands on the table. The sugar bowl was in front of her. Did she dare throw it at him? She knew her aim was good, but a gun was faster than a sugar bowl. Go into the living room. As she walked around the table, Cretan reached over, grabbed her notes and the beginning of her article, and stuffed them in his pocket. There was a wooden rocking chair next to the fireplace. Cretan pointed to it. Sit down, right there. Alvirah sat down heavily. Ned's gun was still trained on her. If she tipped the rocker forward and landed on him, could she get away from him? Cretan reached for a narrow key dangling from the mantel. Leaning over, he inserted it into a cylinder in one of the bricks and... What the fuck? There's a cylinder in the bricks?
Okay. I'm gonna...
Wasn't expecting some Scooby-Doo shit. Leaning over, he inserted it into a cylinder in one of the bricks and turned it. The hissing sound of gas spurted from the fireplace. Never mind, I'm just retarded.
Oh, yeah, you're just...
Whee!
Wow, a drink for you being fucking retarded.
Oh, I've never...
I was like, I'm pretty sure they're just talking about a fucking fart.
He straightened up. From the matchbox of the mantel, he extracted a long safety match, scratched it on the box, blew out the flame, and tossed the match onto the hearth. It's getting cold, he said. You decided to light a fire. You turned on the gas jet, threw in a match, but it didn't take. When you bent down to turn off the jet and start again, you lost your balance and fell. Your head struck the mantel, and you lost consciousness. Terrible accident for such a nice woman. Cynthia will be very upset when she finds you. The smell of gas was permeating the room. Alvirah tried to tilt the rocker forward. She had to take the chance of butting Cretan with her head and making him drop the gun. She was too late. A vice-like grip on her shoulders, the sense of being pulled forward, her forehead slamming against the mantel before she fell to the stone hearth. As she lost consciousness, Alvirah was aware of the sickening smell of gas filling her nostrils. Here's Ned now, Lillian said calmly at the sound of door chimes. I'll let him in. Cynthia waited. Lillian still had not admitted anything. Could she get Ned Cretan to incriminate himself? She felt like a tightrope walker on a slippery wire, trying to inch her way across a chasm. If she failed, the rest of her life wouldn't be worth living. Cretan was following Lillian into the room. Cynthia. His nod was impersonal, not unpleasant. He pulled up a chair beside the desk where Lillian had an open file of printouts. I'm just giving Cynthia an idea of how much the estate shrank after the taxes had been settled, Lillian told Cretan. Then we'll estimate her share. Don't deduct whatever you paid Ned from what is rightfully mine, Cynthia said. She saw the angry look Ned shot at Lillian. Oh, please, she snapped. Among three of us, let's say it straight. Lillian said coldly, I told you that I wanted to share the estate. I know my father could drive people over the edge. I'm doing this because I'm sorry for you. Now, here are the figures. For the next 15 minutes, Lillian pulled balance sheets out of the file. Allowing for taxes and then interest made on the remainder, your share would now be $5 million. And this house, Cynthia interjected. Bewildered, she realized that with each passing moment, Lillian and Ned were becoming more visibly relaxed. They were both smiling. Oh, not the house, Lillian protested. There'd be too much gossip. We'll have the house appraised, and I'll pay you the value of it. Remember, Cynthia, I'm being very generous. My father toyed with people's lives. He was cruel. If you hadn't killed him, someone else would have. That's why I'm doing this. You're doing it because you don't want to sit in a courtroom and take the chance on being convicted of murder. That's why you're doing it. Oh, God, Cynthia thought. It's no use. If I can't get her to admit it, it's all over. But tomorrow, Lillian and Ned would have the chance to check on Alvirah. You can have the house, she said. Don't pay me for it. Just give me the satisfaction of hearing the truth. Admit that I had nothing to do with your father's murder. Lillian glanced at Ned, then at the clock. I think at this time we should honor that request. She began to laugh. Cynthia, I am like my father. I enjoy toying with people. My father did phone to me to tell him about the change in his will. I could live with Dartmouth getting half his estate, but not you. He told me you were coming up. The rest was easy. My mother told me my mother was a wonderful woman. She was only too happy to verify that I was in New York with her that evening. Ned was delighted to get a great deal of money for giving you a boat ride. You're smart, Cynthia. Smarter than the district attorney's office. Smarter than that dumb lawyer you had. Let the recorder be working, Cynthia prayed. Let it be working. And smart enough to find a witness who could verify my story, she added. Lillian and Ned burst into laughter. What witness? Ned asked. Get out, Lillian told her. Get out this minute and don't come back. I just love this. Let's reveal it. It's fine.
Why would you do that?
Like, you were just, like, right at that moment being like, oh, I'm glad you killed him. Someone else would have. Oh, I guess we could get rid of fucking insane.
Why not just fucking... Just be like... Well, even if you didn't do it, well, then no one knows who does. Get out. That's all I... And also, why... This bitch won't marry a rich fucking weatherman. And this bitch fucking just... She's already been to prison. Why the fuck... You're getting offered $5 million fucking dollars. Just fucking take it. Just the real world.
But yeah, but now she's not getting it because they're just like, oh, we got rid of your lawyers. So bye. Let's go.
Well, yeah, because you're a bitch.
Jeff Knight drove swiftly along Route 6, trying to read signs through the torrential rain that was slashing the windshield.
All over.
Exit 8. He was coming up to it. The producer of the 10 o'clock news had been unexpectedly decent. Of course there was a reason. Go ahead. If Cynthia Latham is on the Cape and thinks she has a lead on her stepfather's death, you've got a great story breaking. Jeff wasn't interested in a great story. His only concern was Cynthia. Now he gripped the steering wheel with his long fingers. He had managed to grab her address as well as her phone number from a parole officer. He'd spent a lot of summers on the Cape. That is why it had been so frustrating when he had tried to prove Cynthia's story about stopping at the hamburger stand and gotten nowhere. But he'd always stayed in Eastham, some 50 miles from Cotuit. Exit 8. He turned onto Union Street, drove to Route 6A, a couple of miles more. Why did he have the sense of impending doom? If Cynthia had a real lead that could help her, she could be in danger. He had to slam on his brakes when he reached Knobscusset Road. Another car, ignoring the stop sign, raced from Knobscusset across 6A. Damn fool, Jeff thought as he turned right, then left toward the bay. He realized that the whole area was in darkness. A power failure. He reached the dead end, turned left. The cottage had to be on this winding lane. Number 6. He drove slowly, trying to read the numbers as his headlights shone on the mailboxes. 2, 4, 6. Jeff pulled into the driveway, threw open the door, and ran through the pelting rain toward the cottage. He held his finger on the bell, then realized that because of the power failure, it did not work. He pounded on the door several times. There was no answer. Cynthia wasn't home. He started to walk down the steps. Then a sudden, unreasoning fear made him go back, pound again on the door, then turn the knob. It twisted in his hand. He pushed the door open. "Cynthia?" he started to call, then gasped as the odor of gas rushed at him. He could hear the hissing coming from the fireplace. Rushing to turn the jet off, he tripped over the prone figure of Alvirah. Great, the trips over her too. Wonderful. Some of yours, because I don't have any left. I'm too lazy, because there's like 2 pages left. Holy God. Willie moved restlessly in the back seat of Cynthia's car. She'd been in that house for more than an hour now. The guy who'd come later had been there 15 minutes. Willie wasn't sure what to do. Alvirah really hadn't given specific instructions. She just wanted him to be around to make sure Cynthia didn't leave the house with anyone. As he debated, he heard the screeching sound of sirens. Police cars. The sirens got closer. Astonished, Willie watched as they turned into the long driveway of the Richards estate and thundered toward him. Policemen rushed from the squad cars, raced up the steps, and pounded on the door. A moment later, a sedan pulled into the driveway and stopped behind the squad cars. As Willie watched, a big fellow in a trench coat leaped out of it and took the steps to the porch 2 at a time. Willie climbed awkwardly out of the car and hoisted himself to his feet in the driveway. He was in time to grab Alvirah as she staggered from the back of the sedan. Even in the dark, he could see the welt on her forehead. "Honey, what happened?" "I'll tell you later." "Get me inside. I don't want to miss this." In the study of the late Stuart Richards, Alvirah experienced her finest hour. Pointing her finger at Ned in her most vibrant tones, she pronounced, "He held a gun to me. He turned on the gas jet, he smashed my head against the fireplace, and he told me that Lillian Richards paid him $3 million to set up Cynthia as the murderer. Cynthia stared at her stepsister. And unless the batteries in Alvirah's recorder are dead, I have both of them on record admitting their guilt. The next morning, Willy fixed a late breakfast and served it on the deck. The storm had ended, and once again the sky was joyously blue. Seagulls swooped down to feast on surfacing fish. The bay was tranquil, and children were making castles in the damp sand at the water's edge. Alvirah, not that much worse for her experience, had finished her article and phoned it in to Charlie Evans. Charlie had promised her the most ornate sunburst pin that money could buy, one with a microphone so sensitive it could pick up a mouse sneezing in the next room. Now, as she munched a chocolate-covered donut and sipped coffee, she said, "Oh, here comes Jeff. What a shame he had to drive back to Boston last night. But wasn't he wonderful, telling the story on the news this morning, and all about how Ned Cretan is talking his head off to the cops? Believe me, Jeff will go places with the networks." "That guy saved your life, honey," Willy said. "He's aces high with me. I can't believe I was curled up in that car like a jack-in-the-box when you had your head in a gas jet." They watched as Jeff got out of the car, and Cynthia rushed down the walk and into his arms. Alvirah pushed her chair back. "I'll run over and say hello. It's a real treat to see how they look at each other. They're so in love." Willy placed a gentle but firm hand on her shoulder. "Alvirah, honey," he begged, "just this once, for 5 minutes. Mind your own business." That was a great one. That was a great one. Love it.
Oh my god.
Oh, that was great. That was fucking great.
Millennial dudes blown away by old lady bugs in the series.